3 days before the ceremony, she whispered, "Your family's just trailer trash. I'm cutting off your redneck family." I said, "Okay, no problem." The next morning, I canceled the entire wedding and all the payments I made for her education, and now she's $110,000 in debt. She called me 78 times. 3 days before the ceremony, I thought I had it all figured out. My name's Jonas, and I'd built the kind of life people in my hometown used to call impossible. I grew up in a small town off Route 19, where every man worked with his hands and every woman knew every neighbor's name. My family never had much, but they were honest, proud people. That was enough for me. When I met Marielle, I thought she saw that honesty for what it was. She came from money, the kind that doesn't talk about it, but makes sure you notice it. Her parents lived in a house that looked like a wedding venue itself. Columns, fountains, even a manicured lawn that didn't have a single weed. She was used to fine dining and private clubs. I was used to eating steak once a month. Somehow, I thought we balanced each other. The week of the wedding was chaos. Guests flying in, her mother micromanaging everything, me double-checking payments and hotel blocks. I barely had time to sleep. Still, I was proud. I'd paid for most of it myself: venue deposit, catering, her dress fittings, and even her graduate tuition. She told everyone I insisted. I didn't correct her, though in truth, she'd pushed for it more than once, hinting how modern couples share everything. That night, I came back to her apartment to drop off some documents for the rehearsal dinner. The door was unlocked, lights dim. I heard her voice from the bedroom, soft and sharp like a blade wrapped in silk. She was on speakerphone with her cousin. I wasn't supposed to hear it, but she hadn't closed the door all the way. I stood there long enough to catch every word that mattered. She was complaining about my family coming in from out of state, how they'll probably wear jeans to the reception, and how she planned to cut them off after the wedding. Then came the one that stuck like a splinter under my skin. I'm tired of pretending to like his trailer trash relatives. They're embarrassing. It felt like a physical hit. I didn't say anything at first. I walked into the room, calm but burning inside. She jumped when she saw me. She scrambled to end the call, acting as if nothing happened, brushing her hair and pretending to look busy. That's the thing about arrogance. It assumes it can lie faster than you can think. Dinner with her family was already planned that evening. Her parents wanted to review details one last time. I went anyway, even though I could barely look at her. Her mother, Darlene, immediately started another long talk about flower arrangements. I listened in silence until Marielle began speaking over me, joking about my family's simple taste. I could feel something shift in me then, like a bridge snapping under pressure. I asked her in front of everyone what exactly she'd meant earlier about my family being embarrassing. The room went still. Her father stared at me, her mother blinked, and Marielle turned pale. She said I must have misheard, that I was stressed from work. She even teared up, pretending to be wounded by my accusation. Her mother immediately jumped to defend her, accusing me of being dramatic so close to the wedding. I didn't argue. I just excused myself and left. On the drive home, the anger turned into something colder: clarity. For the first time, I noticed all the small things I'd ignored for months. How she rolled her eyes when I talked about my parents' farm. How she laughed when I told her my dad still fixed tractors for neighbors who couldn't afford repairs. She always claimed it was cute, but in hindsight, it was mockery disguised as affection. That night, I opened our joint account to review payments. The numbers didn't look right. Several large transfers had been moved from the shared wedding fund to her personal account. When I checked the timestamps, I realized it wasn't recent. It had been happening for months, little by little, every time I got a bonus or extra overtime pay. She had been siphoning off money while making me believe she was budgeting for the wedding. It was like watching a string of fireworks ignite one by one. I started pulling records, bank emails, and statements. The more I found, the quieter I became. I realized the woman I was about to marry wasn't marrying me for who I was. She was marrying me because she thought I'd never see what she was doing. Still, I didn't confront her again. I wanted her to think I believed her story. I wanted her to sleep peacefully that night, convinced everything was fine. So I played along. I texted her later, apologizing for being touchy. She sent back a heart emoji and said she loved me. The next morning, I took the day off work. While she was busy posting pictures of the rehearsal brunch on her social media, I sat in front of my laptop making phone calls. I started with the venue. I explained that I wanted to transfer the payment structure and asked them to confirm whose name was on each invoice. Every one of them, venue, florist, catering, even her makeup artist, was registered under Marielle's billing info. I hadn't realized it, but she'd insisted on taking care of the paperwork. That was her mistake. By noon, I'd confirmed that canceling would cost her more than half of what she'd already taken. I moved on to her tuition account next. I'd paid her university directly through a long-term tuition plan. I called the financial office and revoked authorization for further disbursements. The clerk said that would automatically charge her for the balance due, over $100,000. When I hung up, I sat back and thought about how calm I felt. Not proud, not vindicated, just steady. Everything she'd mocked me for, everything she thought made me small, was exactly what gave me the patience to play this out without breaking. That night, I went back to her apartment again, this time acting completely normal. She greeted me with her usual smile, kissed me like nothing ever happened, and asked if I could drive her to the bridal fitting tomorrow. I said sure. I even complimented her dress hanging by the window. It glittered in the soft light like a promise she didn't deserve. I didn't sleep much that night. Instead, I made a list of every connection she'd built using my name. Bank accounts, tuition loans, vendor bookings. I planned every cancellation carefully so that it would all unravel at once, right before the ceremony. By the time dawn came, I'd made up my mind. The wedding wouldn't happen, but she wouldn't hear it from me, not yet. She'd hear it when the world around her started collapsing, one canceled payment at a time. The day after I made my decision, I woke up before sunrise. Marielle's apartment was quiet, the kind of silence that used to make me feel calm, but now just felt staged. She was still asleep, curled up under her designer sheets, looking like a woman who'd never worried about anything real. I looked at her and realized I'd been mistaking polish for class, confidence for depth. Everything about her was performance. I brewed coffee and sat by the window, pretending to scroll through emails while she slept. What she didn't know was that I had already emailed half the vendors asking for confirmation numbers, account details, and payment histories. Each response made my next move easier. The florist confirmed she hadn't paid her share. The photographer said her retainer was overdue. Even the wedding planner hinted that Marielle had been delaying payments because her fiancé is covering everything. I smiled reading that one. She'd told everyone I was desperate to impress her family. That was the image she'd built. Jonas the simple man, trying too hard to fit into her world. When she finally woke up, she spent half the morning on her phone, bragging to friends about her dream wedding and how men from humble beginnings make the most devoted husbands. I almost laughed. She didn't realize she was describing the version of me she'd already destroyed. Around noon, she told me she was heading to the bridal boutique for another fitting and that I should relax before the big day. As soon as the door shut, I opened my laptop again. I called her university's finance office first. The representative, a polite man named Mr. Cobb, confirmed the tuition plan had been frozen and reverted under her name. I asked if she'd been notified. He said the letter was already mailed to her apartment. That image made me smile, the envelope sitting in her mailbox while she tried on another $1,000 veil. Then I moved to the next part of the plan, the accounts. I visited the bank in person, withdrew the remainder of my savings, and transferred it to an older account she didn't know existed. I closed the joint one entirely. The banker, a middle-aged woman who'd seen too many divorces, gave me a look that said she understood more than I was telling her. By the time I returned home, I felt strangely light. There was no guilt, just purpose. That evening, we attended the final rehearsal dinner at her parents' estate. Their backyard looked like something out of a magazine. Chandeliers hanging from trees, a string quartet playing, servers walking around with champagne. Her father, Richard, gave a speech about merging two great families, while I nodded politely. Every compliment sounded hollow now. Marielle stood beside me the whole night, touching my arm, whispering small jokes. To everyone else, we looked like the perfect couple. To me, it felt like theater with bad dialogue. At one point, her cousin Nora pulled me aside. She'd been the one on the phone the night I overheard everything. I could tell she was uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact. She finally muttered something about how Marielle gets carried away sometimes, and she doesn't mean what she says. That's when I realized Nora knew exactly what had been said, and she was trying to soften the fallout she saw coming. But what caught my attention wasn't the apology. It was her hesitation when she mentioned the guest list. I asked casually what she meant, and she quickly changed the subject. I made a mental note to check it later. When I got home, I opened Marielle's tablet. She'd left it unlocked, and curiosity won. Inside her email drafts, I found the guest list folder. That's where I saw his name, Sebastian. She'd listed him as an old family friend, plus one for one of the bridesmaids. I remembered her mentioning that name once, calling him someone from college. There were messages between them too, some weeks old, some recent. Nothing explicit, but full of nostalgia, private jokes, photos from old vacations, the kind of warmth she never showed me anymore. One message stood out. We'll talk after the honeymoon. I just need closure. His reply. Closure sounds a lot like temptation. That was the moment I knew my quiet plan wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about self-respect. I printed the emails, folded them neatly, and placed them in the folder that contained our prenup. She'd never bothered reading that document, dismissing it as something my lawyer can handle. She didn't realize how airtight it was. Everything purchased under my name stayed mine. Every investment reverted if the marriage didn't happen. The next day, I started preparing the last steps. I called the catering company and asked for a full refund on my payments, knowing they'd automatically charge her for the balance. I canceled the honeymoon reservation and redirected the penalty to her card, since she'd used her account for the initial booking. By noon, the avalanche was already forming. She texted me that evening, asking why the wedding planner was calling her about missing signatures. I told her I'd handle it tomorrow. She sent back a heart emoji and a photo of her ring. It was supposed to reassure me. Instead, it reminded me how much it had cost, a diamond I'd chosen, paid for, and now hated to look at. The following morning, she showed up at my place unannounced with coffee and pastries, acting overly affectionate. It was her pattern when she felt something off, smother me with charm until I forgot the reason I was angry. She talked about wedding vows, about moving to a bigger house after the honeymoon. I listened and nodded, filing each new sentence as evidence of how far she drifted from anything real. When she left, I drove to her university campus again, just to make sure everything was confirmed. The administrator there told me the tuition freeze had triggered a full debt reassignment. She was officially responsible for the $110,000 owed. She wouldn't know it yet. The system would update within 48 hours. That night, I went to dinner with my parents. They were excited, nervous, talking about the long drive to the city for the wedding. I didn't tell them what I'd discovered. I just asked my dad what he thought about people who pretend to be better than others. He said something simple. The ones who have to say they're better usually aren't. By the time I got back to my apartment, it was past midnight. I sat down, opened the laptop, and drafted one last email. I wrote to every vendor, attaching copies of receipts, authorization cancellations, and final payment withdrawals. Then I scheduled them to send 3 days later, the morning before the ceremony. I didn't want her to see it coming. I looked around my apartment, at the boxes of decorations she'd picked, the framed photo of us from our engagement shoot, the gifts from her friends. They felt foreign now, like props from someone else's life. When I finally shut off the lights, I felt something I hadn't in weeks, relief. Not joy, not anger. Just the steady quiet of a man who knew exactly what he was doing and why. Marielle wanted to marry a man who would never stand up to her. She was about to learn what it looked like when he finally did. The day before the wedding began like any other, quiet, calculated, and full of routine. But by the time the sun set, everything Marielle had built on lies would be falling apart. I woke early, checking my email drafts one last time. Every cancellation was lined up, every refund triggered, every invoice rerouted to her accounts. I had spent days rehearsing this in my mind, making sure no step led back to me. The timeline was perfect. At exactly 9 a.m., vendors would begin calling her. At 9:30, the bank notifications would arrive. By noon, her world would start to tilt. At breakfast, she was radiant, talking about table decor, champagne brands, and the photographer's artistic vision. She didn't notice how I watched her like someone studying a fading reflection. She mentioned that Sebastian, her college friend, had texted her congratulations for the wedding. My pulse slowed, not quickened. She still didn't know I'd seen the messages between them. When she left to meet the makeup artist, I stayed home, pretending to rest. In truth, I was watching the dominoes fall. The first email came at 9:02, the venue cancellation confirmation. Refund processed. All billing transferred to Marielle's name. At 9:14 came the florist. Per your updated request, service has been terminated. Then came the caterer, the decorator, the string quartet. Every confirmation arrived like a heartbeat. By 9:30, I turned off my phone notifications. I didn't want to hear the fallout secondhand. I wanted her to be the first to feel the ground shift. At 10 o'clock, my prediction came true. Her call came in. One, then another, then 20. By the 50th, my voicemail was full. I listened to one. Her tone had changed from cheerful to trembling. She said the planner was panicking, that her mother was furious, that the venue had canceled because of payment reversals. I could almost picture the chaos. Guests calling for confirmations, her parents pacing around their marble kitchen, and her voice cracking between anger and disbelief. I didn't answer. Instead, I emailed her. A calm, professional note. Attached were documents, screenshots of her messages with Sebastian, copies of the bank transfers she'd made from our joint account, and a transcript of what I overheard, the trailer trash comment. The subject line was simple, wedding status. I didn't insult her. I didn't explain. I just ended it with one sentence. You built a wedding for yourself. Now you can pay for it yourself. An hour later, my phone exploded with new messages. Some from unknown numbers, probably her family. Others from Nora, who sounded shaken. She said Marielle's parents were threatening to call the police over financial sabotage. I laughed under my breath. They didn't realize every transaction was legally hers, every invoice under her name. She had insisted on it months ago because it looks better if I'm the client. Now, that vanity was the rope tightening around her neck. At noon, I went out for lunch. It was surreal, sitting in a diner while knowing chaos was unfolding across town. People around me talked about normal things, traffic, work, weekend plans. Meanwhile, my fiancée was probably screaming into a phone, trying to salvage a wedding that no longer existed. By 2 o'clock, I checked social media out of curiosity. And there it was, a ripple starting to spread. One of her bridesmaids, tired of Marielle's arrogance, had posted screenshots of her group chat. Messages where Marielle mocked my parents, bragged about marrying beneath her class, and laughed about how I owed her this wedding after she elevated my status. The comments section filled fast. Some defended her, others didn't. But the truth was out. By 3:30, the third twist landed harder than I expected. Sebastian himself posted a story. A photo of him with her, recent, unmistakable. His caption said, "Guess I wasn't the only one invited to the wedding." He exposed her for everything she'd done, even attaching the messages she sent him about meeting after the honeymoon. Her world collapsed faster than I could have planned. I didn't even have to lift a finger. At 4 o'clock, her father, Richard, called me. His voice was shaking but not angry, more confused. He said Marielle was hysterical, that she'd locked herself in her room, that people were calling the house nonstop. He wanted me to fix it, to be the bigger man. He claimed her words were taken out of context, that I was making a scene. I told him calmly that there was no scene, just consequences. I reminded him that every contract was in her name, that the university debt was legally hers, and that I had already withdrawn everything I contributed. His silence lasted a long time before he muttered something about reputation and hung up. By 5 o'clock, the news had spread beyond her circle. Mutual friends messaged me privately, some congratulating me for escaping, others asking if it was all true. I didn't respond. There was nothing to clarify. That evening, I drove past the venue. The sign out front still read "Reserved for the Hayes Bennett wedding," though the gates were locked and the parking lot empty. Workers were packing up floral stands, their faces tired and indifferent. I parked across the street and watched for a while, thinking how easily something that took months to build could vanish in a day. At 7 o'clock, my phone buzzed again. Marielle, 63rd call. Then 64th. By 78, she finally stopped. Not one message contained an apology. They were all demands, accusations, emotional appeals wrapped in entitlement. She blamed me for humiliating her. She said her parents might disown her. She said I had ruined her life. But she never once said she was sorry for what she did. That night, the city felt quieter than usual. I walked home instead of driving, letting the noise of traffic fade into the background. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel tension pressing against my chest. I didn't even feel victorious. Just certain. Back in my apartment, I opened the folder with all the documents, emails, screenshots, cancellations. I deleted them one by one. I didn't need them anymore. The story had already written itself, and everyone involved knew how it ended. Before midnight, I got one last email from the hotel where the honeymoon was booked. They confirmed her card had been charged for early termination fees. The total was over $8,000. It was poetic in a way. She wanted luxury. Now she could pay for it on her own. I went to bed at peace. The wedding date was still printed on my calendar, but it meant nothing now. Tomorrow was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. Instead, it would be the day she finally saw who she really was, without the money, the audience, or the lies. The morning of what should have been our wedding felt strangely normal. No ceremony, no tuxedo waiting by the door, no frantic messages from vendors or relatives asking where to stand. The sun came through the blinds as if nothing extraordinary had happened. For the first time in months, I didn't wake to her voice or her demands, just silence, calm and absolute. By noon, I drove to my parents' house outside the city. They were confused at first when I told them the wedding was off. My mother tried to hide her shock, asking if we'd had a fight that could still be fixed. My father only looked at me for a long time and said quietly that sometimes God removes people from your path before you see how much damage they'd cause. He was right. While we ate, my phone buzzed constantly. Notifications stacked up like raindrops on glass. Messages from Marielle, her mother, even old friends who'd taken her side. I didn't answer any of them. By the time dessert came out, the number had climbed to 78 missed calls. I muted the phone and slid it into a drawer. Marielle's meltdown became the talk of her social circle. I didn't have to hear it firsthand. People told me everything. The university had already reissued her tuition bill. and she realized she was personally liable for the $110,000. Her father tried to negotiate, but the paperwork bore her digital signature. The debt was hers entirely. The catering company filed a legal notice against her for breach of contract. The venue demanded full payment. All of it landed the same day. Her perfect image began cracking within hours. The bridesmaid screenshots had spread beyond her circle and reached mutual acquaintances, and soon every version of the story was online. The arrogant fiancé, the insulted groom, the public humiliation. She tried to post a long explanation, blaming me for being unstable and vengeful, but it only made her look worse. People had receipts. The internet doesn't forgive hypocrisy. I stayed away from all of it. I went back to work the next week as if nothing had happened. My coworkers had heard rumors, of course, but no one brought it up. They probably expected me to be broken. Instead, I threw myself into overtime and helped my parents repair their old farmhouse roof on weekends. It was something tangible, something that couldn't lie. 2 weeks later, Nora, Marielle's cousin, called. She sounded nervous, almost guilty. She said she'd seen the entire collapse and wanted to tell me something important. Apparently, after everything went public, Marielle had shown up at Sebastian's apartment demanding he defend her online. He refused. He told her she'd used him as a pawn, and when she slapped him in anger, he threw her out. She spent that night at a hotel her parents refused to pay for. Nora said Marielle had burned every bridge she'd ever built. I thanked her and hung up. That call didn't bring satisfaction, just closure. A month passed. Life went on. My parents' farmhouse started looking whole again. Paint fresh on the walls, windows sealed tight. My dad joked that fixing roofs was better therapy than talking about heartbreak. He was right. Then one afternoon, while picking up lumber at the hardware store, I saw her again. Marielle. She was standing near the service counter, arguing with the cashier about a declined card. She looked thinner, tired, her usual poise replaced with jittery panic. I hadn't planned on speaking to her, but she noticed me first. For a second, her eyes widened, and the old reflexive charm flickered back. She walked toward me as if nothing had happened. She started talking fast, saying she'd been meaning to explain, that the whole thing had been a misunderstanding, that I'd overreacted. I just listened, arms crossed, no anger, no pity. She went on about stress, family pressure, and how her father had cut her off financially. Then she said she forgave me. Forgave me. That was the moment I realized she hadn't learned a single thing. When she finished, I simply told her I was glad the truth had come out before vows were exchanged. Then I wished her well and walked out. I didn't raise my voice or argue. The silence that followed said more than I ever could. That night, she sent another message, a voice note that began mid-sentence. I just wanted to say, then it cut off. Whether she deleted it or lost her nerve, I never found out. I didn't open it again. Weeks turned into months. Her name faded from conversations, from headlines, from memory. Rumor had it she was working as an assistant in a small design firm, paying off debt in installments. Her once spotless social media accounts had gone dark. I didn't gloat. I just let it be. One evening in early autumn, I drove past the old wedding venue on my way back from a job site. The iron gates were open for another event, a different couple celebrating what we never did. Through the lights, I could see the fountain she'd chosen, the archway she'd obsessed over. For a moment, I imagined what that day would have looked like if things had gone differently. Then I remembered her whisper, trailer trash. Every insult, every fake smile, every transaction disguised as love. I drove away without stopping. Sometime later, I met someone new. Her name was Ellen, a local teacher who volunteered at a youth center my company helped renovate. She was grounded, unpretentious, and kind in the quiet way that doesn't need validation. I told her about my family early on, expecting the usual polite disinterest I'd grown used to. Instead, she asked questions, genuinely curious about my parents' farm, about the old tools my dad still used. That's when I understood the difference between affection and appreciation. One wants to own you. The other wants to understand you. I never told Ellen the full story of Marielle. She only knew that I'd dodged a bad marriage. It wasn't shame that kept me silent. It was gratitude. I didn't need to relive it to know how close I came to losing myself. A year later, my life looked different in every way that mattered. The farmhouse became a weekend retreat. My parents were healthy. Work was steady. And every once in a while, I'd receive a spam email from a luxury brand, probably one of the subscriptions Marielle had signed me up for. Each time I saw her old name pop up, I'd simply delete it. No anger, just distance. Sometimes, people think revenge means destruction. For me, it meant preservation. Keeping what was mine, my dignity, my peace, my roots, while watching her lose what she'd pretended to have all along. The night before the anniversary of the canceled wedding, I found the old envelope I'd used to store her printed emails. I took it outside, tossed it into a metal bin, and lit a match. The paper curled, blackened, and vanished without fanfare. When the last ember died, I stood there for a moment, letting the air clear. Somewhere in the city, maybe she was still talking about what went wrong. Maybe she still blamed me. It didn't matter. I had already won the moment. I stopped trying to prove I deserved respect and started living like I already had it. And that, in the end, was the only ceremony worth remembering.